the extent of its spread and the spontaneity of the outburst was, I think, surprised everyone. And the British realized that as long as you hold on to the coercive powers of the state, you can keep a people under control. The moment the armed forces and the other coercive elements of state go out of your control. So the Royal Naval Indian Navy uprising was that. It was a reality check. There is INA trials, there is here. If Captain Mulla had left his ship and gone, he would have left his shipmates and gone, some of them. He was deeply conscious of that. And he said that if I'm not going to get them out, I'm going to go down with them. Moment he had the first ship hit, he realized something had gone wrong. By the time second ship, he gave orders to abandon the ship. He realized that, it can't be said. And these are quick judgment calls. And as many people as he could put out, he sent them off. And when he was told by someone that you come out, he says, don't worry about me. From all accounts, he handed over his own life jacket to another sailor. Push some people, because it takes guts to jump into a sea at night. And all this in a matter of a couple of minutes. And then went down with his ship. He was last seen sitting on the bridge or whatever. So now, the important thing here is a man who goes against all odds. His ship is hit. He doesn't leave the ship. He sends as many people as he can, and he goes down with the ship. So,
and he could have been out the first if he wanted to.
Been out the first if he wanted. So this is an act of supreme sacrifice. That is why we say in the Navy, you either swim together or sink together.
नमस्कार, मेरा नाम है सुशील सिंह और आप देख रहे हैं इकोलेस। आज हमारे साथ कोमोडोर श्रीकांत बी केसनूर विशिष्ट सेवा मेडल द्वारा नवाजे गए कोमोडोर हैं। मिस्टर डॉक्टर केसनूर, मिस्टर नहीं, माफ़ कीजिएगा, डॉक्टर केसनूर जो है ये इन्होंने पीएचडी करी है इंडिया अफ्रीका रिलेशन में। बहुत ही वेल रेड इंटेलेक्चुअल है। जो इनका 36 साल का स्पैन है नेवी में वो तो है ही है। इन्होंने 2 बार शिप्स कमांड करे हैं। एक आईएनएस विंध्यगिरी वाज वन ऑफ द शिप्स विच जो इन्होंने कमांड किया था। बहुत सारे क्रिएटिव हिस्ट्री रिलेटेड आउटरीच एक्टिविटी जो नेवी की है वो ये करते हैं। लीड राइटर हैं और चीफ एडिटर हैं ऑफ 12 नेवी बुक्स, मोनोग्राफ्स अपार्ट फ्रॉम मेनी अदर पब्लिकेशंस। पीएचडी जो है इन्होंने मुंबई विश्वविद्यालय से करा है। 5 और पोस्ट ग्रेजुएट डिग्री साइंस और सोशल साइंस में इनके पास है। रिटायर होने से पहले जून 2022 में डायरेक्टर ऑफ मारटाइम वॉरफेयर सेंटर एट मुंबई के ऑफिसर इंचार्ज थे। नेवल हिस्ट्री के प्रोजेक्ट्स इन्होंने कर रखे हैं। रिटायर होने के बाद इन्होंने मारटाइम कॉन्शियसनेस, अपने आप को ये मारटाइम इवेंजलिस्ट कहते हैं। तो इस वजह से कुछ सवाल जो थे मेरे पास, जो साइकी को लेकर थे, साइकोलॉजी को लेकर थे, कॉन्शियसनेस को लेकर थे, उन सवालों के कोमोडोर केसनूर ने बहुत ही भव्य जवाब दिए हैं। अगर आप कहें मुझसे तो बहुत ही शानदार उत्तर दिए उन सवालों के इन्होंने। जैसे मैंने एक बहुत ही स्पेसिफिक था जो मेरा कैप्टन महेंद्रनाथ मल्ला को लेकर सवाल था मेरे पास उनके लिए, उस सवाल का उन्होंने बेहतरीन जवाब दिया। इसी प्रकार से जो नेवी को लेकर के, नेवी के बिल्कुल इतिहास से शुरू किया था हमने, चोल डायनेस्टी से लेकर मार्तंड वर्मा से शिवाजी की आर्मी, और फिर उसके बाद कान्होजी आंग्रे, और उसके बाद आज की जो मॉडर्न आर्मी है और किस तरह से भारत की सरकार आर्मी को और एम्पावर और इन्वेस्टमेंट करती जा रही है। हर मुद्दे पे हमने इनसे डिटेल में बात करी। मुझे बहुत ही आनंद आया इनसे बात करके। मुझे उम्मीद है आप लोगों को भी मजा आएगा। तो आइए मिलते हैं कोमोडोर केसनूर से।
लेट्स स्टार्ट सर, व्हाट, सिंस यू आर द एक्सपर्ट ऑफ द हिस्ट्री ऑफ इंडियन नेवी, आप बता दीजिए कि शुरू कहाँ से हुआ, इंडियन नेवी की शुरुआत कहाँ से होती है?
सी देखिए, वी कैन प्राउडली क्लेम the Indian Navy to be carrying the legacy of several thousands of years, because India has a great maritime tradition. Our ancestors sailed across the seas, and that tradition goes back to at least about 4,500 years, because there are enough evidences of the Indus Valley or the Sindhu-Saraswati civilization trading with people in Rome and Greece. It used to go Red Sea and then the land route and then the Mediterranean.
What we are planning to do now.
And फिर similarly our Eastern empires later, and we're talking of many centuries before the common or the Christian era, were similarly trading with empires in the east as far as Japan and China. So right from the most ancient times, Indian seafarers have had cultural, commercial, civilizational links with people as far west as Rome and Greece. Obviously, people in what is called West Asia today, with the East African coast, and then on the east to Southeast Asia, as far east as Japan and China. So this antiquity is about 4,500 years, because the world's oldest dock is at Lothal
जी 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 जी
in Gujarat, which is now going to be the site of a big, magnificent maritime heritage,
Okay.
museum sort of place, which this government is setting up. So that goes back to almost, as I said, many centuries. Now, specifically, some of the historians have said that right from the time of Mauryas, before that, there are references to trade, cultural, the Mauryas, there is references to, say, Navadyaksha, who was the head of the navy, of having a separate department of the navy and things like that.
Chanakya's Arthashastra mentions that.
Chanakya's Arthashastra mentions, but they also had, it's one thing for a text to mention, another thing for a government to actually have,
Yes,
you know. So they had those structures, and then the Guptas, the Kalingas, this one, and even the Palas, the Pratiharas, the North, and a huge many South Indian empires, Pallavas, Chelas, Cheras, Pandyas, and above all the Cholas, the Kalingas in the east. So all of them had maritime empires, maritime disposition. They were actively trading. So we go back that long. Even if you take navy to be specifically about protection of trade, about putting down bad order at sea and establishing good order, at least from the time of the Mauryas and all that, this starts. There's a historian called Bimal Kanti Majumdar who says that I would trace the origins of Indian Navy from that period, the great Magadhan empires and things like that. So we can trace it back to that. Now, a lot of people mistakenly believe that the origins of Indian Navy started with the British coming here in 1612 and establishing a squadron at Surat. Now, the point is, while today's Indian Navy some ways derives its formal frameworks from the British organization, as it would be for many other branches of Indian governance. So yes, from what the British set up in 1612, there is this long list of organizational changes, Bombay Marine, which became then Indian Navy, Royal Indian Marine, Royal Indian Navy, and all that over next 4 centuries. That, however, should not be seen as the origin of Indian Navy, because it would imply that there was no seafaring or sea fighting capability before that, which I don't think is correct. So as I have written in a recent article, I say that our seafaring tradition goes for many millennia. Our naval tradition at least begins with the Guptas or with the Mauryas, and then moves on from there. Our formal frameworks come from the British, but our DNA is more ancient, and we take inspiration from everyone, including the Marathas and the Kunjali Marakkars and all, who stood up and fought the colonials. So actually, I am one person who doesn't want to see a single point of origin for Indian Navy. I think that these many vectors, this sort of rainbow that it gives to the Indian Navy, makes for a more magnificent history than just a single origin.
Especially if we talk about the Cholas, right? Cholas were they had navy at least maybe 3,000 years ago, or maybe 2,500 years ago.
No, that's the ancient Cholas. The Cholas that we talk about in terms of who had a big seafaring navy, that is Rajaraja Chola and Rajendra Chola. Rajaraja was in the 10th century and Rajendra in the 11th century. So sometime around late 10th century, I think 975.
But these people, they went till Japan. What was the navigation technology they were using?
See, that's a very important point, because
क्योंकि वेस्ट में जो है बाकी के लोग हैं, they didn't go till that far. The way the Cholas went all the way to Japan and China. So वो समझ में नहीं आता कि navigation कैसे किया.
देखिए, आपका बात एकदम it's a very interesting, I would say it's a question that needs a lot of thought and probing. The simple answer is that the Indians at that time had good nautical knowledge. You see, people can argue that you can come along the coast to some distance. ठीक है, from you can come from Orissa coast to Tamil Nadu coast along the coast. But आपको वहां से आपको मलक्का स्ट्रेट जाना है, अंडमान जाना है, आपको मिड सी जाना पड़ता है. और मिड सी there is nautical knowledge. What is that nautical knowledge? You navigate, in the ancient days, you navigated using stars. You know, the astronomical knowledge, position of stars and skies. You also needed to have a good knowledge of the currents. Which way does the currents go? Third is you need a good knowledge of winds, you know. And one good thing that helped trade and commerce in the Indian Ocean region was what we call the monsoons, which pattern have stayed the same, and whose winds, the southwest monsoons, blow from the month of June till about September, and then the northeast monsoons, the retreating, which flow in the reverse direction from about Jan to March. Because of the predictable pattern of winds, if you knew about those patterns, those days you navigated through the wind, you could use that to go. So whether it is people coming in to India from West Asia or from in the east going up to Southeast Asia and then further there, they had good nautical knowledge. And by the time the Cholas came, you were at the acme of this nautical knowledge. It had of course been built by previous excursions of people who used to go. Cholas were not, mind you, the first ones to go to Southeast Asia. There are lots of people. And if you see, if you do a logical analysis in today's world, as a business person, you will go to far off places in Southeast Asia only if you are assured of your safety.
That's true.
If you have a return on your investment, which meant that oceanic trade that days was not just safe, but it was prosperous because a person could make money. Maybe your times were more. आजकल हम एक महीने में करते हैं, 15 दिन में करते हैं. That time you took maybe some couple of years. But often people would go, merchants would go in monsoon, come the next monsoon back, catch the wind cycle back, spend months there. But they were assured of their safety and return on investment. Now, when does this happen? This happens when you are building your ships. This happens when you have good knowledge. After all, nobody wants to take a one-way ticket.
Absolutely.
And go. So that was the peak. They had excellent. The short answer is our ancestors had very good nautical knowledge to cross the seas.
One more thing that these people, especially let's discuss Cholas for a little bit.
Yeah.
So good return on investment, and these people, they knew how to go. We had a very good impact in Malaysia, in Indonesia, Singapore. The book of Sanjeev Sanyal claims that Singapore was actually Singapore, and that's why it became Singapore. But nowadays, when you look at today's era, why people are not ready to accept the greatness of Indian kings? Why do we push towards the wall every time, wherein even if it's Singapore, even if it's Indonesia, these countries, and if you meet the people there, and I'm not talking about like a historian would know what had happened, but a normal person, they don't know much about this. So when you tell them that this is how it was, they say, come on, कुछ भी बोलते रहते हो. Because I have met people and I have said कि ये हुआ है, and they're like, नहीं ऐसा कुछ नहीं हुआ.
See,
is this jealousy?
I don't know jealousy or not. Two or three things. One is that over a period of time, there's been denudation of this knowledge. And scholars have not, in one way, you're talking a theme which is very close to me. I believe that knowledge must merge with popular culture. That unless we write books, unless we make movies,
like Ponniyin Selvan 1 and 2, such beautiful
this will
movies.
not go into. Did the academics know of it? Academics always knew of it, and there are several, traces of that in different parts. I mean, what is Angkor Wat and the temples? There's lots in Cambodia. The fact that Ganesha, Hanuman or deities are worshipped in different parts of Southeast Asia. Even in the West, where the carriers of culture and civilization were not as prominent in the East, because East you had kingdom supporting it. Even West mein, your Calicut, Kozhikode or Cambay, they were to then maritime trade what London and Frankfurt is to international aviation now. They were busy hubs. They were, as you would say, they were like the malls and emporiums of the world, So The fact that Vasco da Gama comes to Kozhikode, the fact that Chinese Admiral Tungha, on his last voyage, or what he's called Zheng He many times, he passes away in Kozhikode or Calicut. All this should tell us. I mean, why? People should say, "Kyun bhai? Is jagah mein kya tha?" So these were great emporia of global trade at that time. Unfortunate, and they were redolent, as you would say, if you do a with spices, people, trade, people talking, Arabs, Englishmen, Chinese, Indians, all of that. The problem is we have not been able to bring that enough into popular literature, because maritime literature or maritime history or maritime issues have somehow not taken center stage in the narrative discourse of many countries. India, of course.
Even Marco Polo stayed in Kolkata for a few days.
Yes. And Marco Polo makes a glorious mention of Indian ships.
Mentions it very, very gloriously.
Yeah. So even Ashoka's children, they carry the symbol of Buddha, the saplings, and sail to Sri Lanka from Tamrilipti in today's Bengal, Tamlok. But we don't know that these were all such great ports. There are traditions, mind you, even today in Orissa during Kartik Purnima, you have that tradition of seeing, because ancient times your seafarers used to start on Kartik Purnima there. And if you go by Sanyal's book, there is a similar tradition followed in Bali. It's called Bali Yatra, because people used to go from Kalinga Empire to Bali. And why should now people in today's Bali follow that? Because there is some ancestral memory chip locked. But we've not been able to sort of, इसको अनपैक अच्छी तरह से करके
एक शादी भी तो हुई थी सर, जो बंगाल की क्वीन थी या प्रिंस था, जिसकी शादी श्रीलंका में हुई थी.
बिल्कुल,
वो भी तो है रिलेशन. दैट्स व्हाई दे श्रीलंकन्स आर लाइक बंगालीज, ऐसा कुछ कहा जाता है.
Yeah, there is, in fact, much of the Sinhalese are supposed to have taken their ancestry.
Yes.
Like the Tamilians, they take their ancestry from South India. The Sinhalese ancestry is supposed to come from northeastern India. So that is what makes. So we have not been able to unpack it sufficiently, popularize it sufficiently in India and in other countries in this region. So that is an area. In Europe, there are many countries that are very proud of their nautical heritage. You would think that a country like England, for example, would be. Parts of America would be. That somehow we have not been able to do adequately in India.
So let me ask you one more, because we are moving towards this direction. So I will go back again to history, but let me ask you another question.
Sure.
Let's compare Machiavelli's The Prince against the book written by Chanakya, Arthashastra. Machiavelli's Prince, with all due respect to whosoever likes it, it looks like a small child's joke book when you compare it with Arthashastra. But what a British does, he says that Chanakya was India's Machiavelli. I mean, come on. It's jealousy, nothing else. Because you have enough brain to see that, this book and this book, you know what you are saying. So the idea is that, that to make sure that these people are told that, you're not that great. All the time reminded that you're not that great. You're okay. We are like, Samudragupta was India's Napoleon. Come on now. Samudragupta, the kingdom he had in India was bigger than entire Europe. How come he was Napoleon of India? Come on now. I mean, what are you talking about? So don't you think that there is an attempt to make sure that these people should not realize who they are? जैसे बजरंग बली के साथ था ना कि इनको बता मत दो ये कौन लोग हैं, otherwise they will just go crazy, they'll do something bigger.
Of course, but these are the ways that cultural and historical narratives are set. I mean, you're talking of this, I don't even agree when they call Madhubala as India's Marilyn Monroe. Personally, I feel Madhubala was far more beautiful.
That's true.
With no disrespect to Marilyn Monroe, I feel Madhubala was far more. But exactly, the point you make is they establish and think that the gold standard or reference begins there.
Even if it's visible that it's stupid, what you're trying to sell me.
Yes, but not many people realize its stupidity. Now, of course, with greater knowledge, with greater awareness all over, there is, let's say, a bit more of equalization coming in. And
as Jaishankar is doing it.
Yes, absolutely. And when he says the Indian way, when our External Affairs Minister frequently quotes our ancient epics to talk of lessons of diplomacy, because there is this entire business in international relations mein, ठीक है, आप थ्योरी जितना भी लिखो कि ये सब यहाँ से शुरू हुआ है, all theories of international relations, all theories of diplomacy. So one reason, of course, is, like I said, we've not codified it enough. You brought in Arthashastra, and as the name itself is evident, it covers a large grasp.
True.
It is about statecraft, it's about governance. So one of the problems is that we have this systematically, whatever we codified has been forgotten, written. Doctrines and doctrinal literature provides you those conceptual underpinnings to argue things. The second problem is that where we have done it, there's not enough knowledge. And third, as you brought out, since our standard reference has always been Western text or their frame of reference, even when we interpret Indian texts which are of earlier antiquity, like you brought out between Samudragupta, तो बहुत पहले थे नेपोलियन से. Okay, so where
It's
there
like it's like जैसे नहीं बोलते हो कि इसका बाप बिल्कुल उसके बेटे जैसा दिखता है.
of course, it's exactly like that. So that is a problem. So we need to create the Indian way. We need to create the Indian knowledge on these as a contribution. ये नहीं कि हम लड़ रहे हैं with the world, as our active contribution to this. And their production of knowledge is very, very important. And I know I'm jumping the gun, but one of the things that people have not noticed enough about the Indian Navy is that we have therefore written our own doctrine and strategy documents, which are very well regarded, and they're open to the public, internationally well regarded, because we say, along with doing everything else, we also want to show that when it comes to production of knowledge, you are not behind anyone. So that production of knowledge is very important, and there you are right. We have been given a raw deal, and it's time to reset that.
But don't you think that that our dharma, especially the Hindu dharma, it's a religion of Shruti. That father will tell the story to son and son will. We don't write it, right? जैसे अगर उर्दू में शेर कहोगे आप तो बोलोगे कि स्पेशली ब्रिटिश के लिए कि तुमने जितना लिखा है उससे दोगुना तो हम भूल गए. तुमने जितना लिख रखा है डॉक्ट्रिन इंटरनेशनल रिलेशन उससे दोगुना तो हम भूल गए कि मतलब हमारे कल्चर ही भूल गया कि पता नहीं क्या क्या लिखा था, सब भूल गए हम. तो मुझे ये समझ में नहीं आता. और ये जो आपको क्या लगता है अभी जो करंट गवर्नमेंट है, द ओनली रीजन द वेस्ट इज हेटिंग दिस करंट गवर्नमेंट इज बिकॉज they are not listening to them, or they are not listening to the way they want us to behave, which we were doing. Even BJP rule in 1990 2004, we did what they wanted us to do. The current government is absolutely saying that no, there are ways which we want to do the same thing.
On this question, you brought in 2-3 interesting points. First is the aspect of knowledge through Shrutis. Yes, of course. I mean, we are aware that it is oral tradition. Indian tradition is oral tradition. But it made sense to have an oral tradition when it was difficult to write and push. It is with good reason that people say that printing press was one of the biggest revolutions in the world, because it reset the way knowledge could be distributed and disseminated all over the world. And in those days, nautical knowledge, if you shared between people, you would be put to death. It was so precious, So is it, while continuing to have the oral tradition, which I believe is very rich and which has memory chips embedded in it, should we not, now change that tradition or tweak that tradition so that we are able to find our place in terms of international recognition? I think we need to see it. After all, Indian scholars who go to West are doing beautifully well themselves.
Yes.
And they're doing well adopting and adapting to the Western system while having the inbuilt Indian genius.
Yes.
So I believe that it is very much possible for India to adapt to this. Yes, until the day when we are the sole or biggest superpower, where people see the sense of this tradition in itself, we may have to straddle both ways. But I believe now production of knowledge, which the world sees and reads, and the Indian way and Indian knowledge is important, so that it gets recognized. And then as regards your second question, politically, it's, as a military man, you don't want to take political sides.
You're retired now.
Of course. See, I'll say 2 or 3 things. Certainly one part you put, in international relations, it's simple. Existing power situations don't want new powers to emerge, because it upsets whatever is the existing equation. So India emerging as a bigger, better power every day does pose some challenge to the international system. However, the way India is emerging or arising, largely peaceful, non-hegemonic, not wanting to put or force our ideas on others. Unlike other countries, this is different and it is beneficial. Yes, there may be some criticisms one way or the other, and you have to take that. But on the whole, we are trying to offer a different paradigm. You know, see, in 71, when you went and fought and liberated that country, we didn't sit there.
That's
Within 6 months, we were out, helped the new country establish, came.
Not from 2001 to 2022.
And this is the same model in Ramayana.
Yes.
He goes to Sri
Yeah, yeah,
Lanka.
yeah, yeah.
So unlike other places where you are conquering, India actually has a tradition of intervening when requested for that particular purpose, but not letting that become an overkill and coming back. So that's a rich diplomatic tradition. So now I would think what has happened in the last few years, 10, 15 years, is that there is a simultaneous coming together of several energies, whether in hard power in terms of space, military, this, that, whether in soft power in terms of greater assertion of culture, greater pride in what we are, no longer being apologetic about this one. For example, a thing like temple tourism. Irrespective whether you get a religious angle in it or not, culturally it's great. And these are, for example, Buddhist tourism and making it attractive to, because a lot of world people are Buddhist.
True.
So if we can make India a magnet for a whole lot of those people, it serves tourism, it serves culture. So I think there are several things that are coming together, several energies that are being unleashed, and we're going on a crest. What the Prime Minister defines or as Amrit Kal, that where I think today we are at a point where Indians are by and large far more sure of their place in history and destiny than before. They're not apologetic. They're confident of themselves. Our knowledge systems are coming well. We're doing well. You may occasionally sit back. I mean, in cricket, you may lose an occasional game. You lost the finals in World Cup. You lost the first test. But if you see our Indian cricket team playing now, it's such a different cry from 50 years before. These are fearless guys.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're not afraid of anyone. They're not intimidated by anyone. They don't give in to sledging.
And they also, one more
they
thing,
counter sledge.
one more thing I've observed that very interesting, very, very interesting, that the cricket team example, that every individual is playing for themselves and they're doing it so good.
Yeah.
That it automatically becomes a teamwork.
Absolutely. Yesterday I was talking to some sports administrators, shooting. They're saying India is going to see some such good shooters in next few years. He's saying small 14 or 15-year-old lads from Eastern UP. They may never have caught a gun before, but he says what you need in shooting is a temperament, and you forget your last shot and concentrate on next. That steadiness of mind, you forget. So he says this is there in these young kids because they're confident. They don't mind कि पिछले बार जो हुआ वो हो गया, everything. I think our generation, the generation before that, was a more hesitant, more shy. You can say a bit more apologetic. I don't want to use that word. But essentially, at that time...
My father is a big shooter. My father, we are from Purvanchal, Eastern UP.
Yeah.
I can shoot really good.
Yeah,
I mean, I can I don't have to even think. For example, that clock which you see, I'll be like, it's a clock hai, and I can hit from here. I'll take 10 shots and I'll hit 7 times.
No, but he was saying same. Purvanchal, he's saying Eastern UP is going to be the cradle of our next shooter's lot. Now, this is amazing, because we didn't see... I mean, today, Northeast is contributing so much in terms of sports.
Especially football.
So, I think there is a bursting of several energies coming to them. When I see my son, he's far more confident than I was at that age. Even though I had a job.
Today's kids don't care.
They don't care.
They're not even thinking about the way we used to think, like a job ka nahi hua to kya hoga. They're like, take kuch kar lenge.
So, I think that is the good thing, that sense of confidence that India has. So, it surely will propel us into bigger heights. And then, of course, there are, like you said, in deeper power to the ability to, today, whether it's ability to make your own vaccine against a global pandemic, your ability to land a rocket on moon, your ability to build an aircraft carrier in the country, another...
And then recently there were those 4 astronauts which... that was such a proud moment.
Confidence
that for the first time, apart from the symbol of Air Force, there was a new symbol made of space.
Yes.
I was like, Because this is an emotional moment for everybody who
It is. And imaginatively, the country is saying, India is saying there are new frontiers we are waiting to go, in land or sea. Please remember that ancient times, in the age of what is called enlightenment and exploration, Europe's great pride was that we were exploring the world. Exploration of word, enhancement of knowledge is what they called enlightenment. That was a big carrying card for their countries.
Trevor Noah's joke, did you hear that joke? Trevor Noah says that, हिंदी में बताता हूँ आपको कि मसालों की खोज में ब्रिटिश निकल पड़े इंडिया ढूंढने के लिए. सोचो उनकी बीवियां कितना घटिया खाना बनाती होंगी. कि मतलब पृथ्वी, और उसमें एक और जोक मारा ट्रेवर नोआ ने कि उनको पता था ज्यादा आगे जाएंगे तो नीचे गिर जाएंगे. बिकॉज द बाइबल सेज द पृथ्वी इज फ्लैट, राइट? कि ज्यादा आगे जाएंगे तो नीचे. कैसे सोचो इतने घटिया खाना बनाती थी बीवियां कि गिरने की चिंता भी नहीं करे. इन्होंने बोला इंडिया ढूंढ के रहेंगे, मसाले ढूंढ के रहेंगे, अच्छा खाना खाना है हमको. उसके चक्कर में इंडिया चले आए वो लोग.
बिल्कुल.
दैट वाज जस्ट अ जोक, बट इट इज सो ट्रू इफ यू लुक एट इट.
It is. So I think these are some of the things that is now defining us: quest for knowledge, confidence, greater energies, wanting to do well, not being satisfied with being second or third.
Cleanliness, safai. It's becoming a natural part of everybody. It was not like in 90s or 2000s. Keeping stations clean, it's normal for like your son or your kids. बड़ा normal होगा कि ध्यान सफाई रखनी है. It's very normal for them, right? वो culture ही धीरे-धीरे खत्म होता जा रहा है गंदगी फैलाने वाला.
और इंफ्रा देखिए, छोटे जगह में भी airports. I mean, you remember the airports that we traveled initially, they were this one. Or roads today, it's easier. To my place, hometown Bijapur from Bombay, which is about 500
Bijapur in what?
North Karnataka.
North Karnataka. So Bijapur was Adil Shahi, right?
Yes, absolutely. I
Adil Shahi.
So that distance used to take much more to travel by car. Now the entire place is smooth. And when it is smooth, then, you also have incentives. I don't need to tell this to you. You are a business, tycoon. But there is so much incentive to doing business because now along the road, there doesn't seem a place where there is not something springing up, whether it's a dhaba, whether it's a store, whether it's a this
But
one.
let me point out another point of view in this. A happy country does a lot better in comparison to a frustrated country.
Of course.
Roads used to frustrate us.
Yes.
Now they make us happy.
True.
गाड़ी लेके मैं निकला, मैं वहां तक पहुंचने में मैं इतना फ्रस्ट्रेट हो गया कि मेरी बिजनेस मीटिंग खराब हो गई. एक दूसरा, गाड़ी लेके मैं निकला, स्मूथली गया, अपना मीटिंग करी, वापस आ गया. दोनों सिनारियो है. तो जो दूसरा सिनारियो हो गया है अभी करंटली और अच्छा होता जा रहा है.
Yeah.
तो उसके चक्कर में क्या होता है, when you are happy about something, you will obviously push for better business.
Yes,
You will obviously
yes.
be because you are happy.
Yeah.
So you will be more, you'll be pushing it for more. बोली बात नहीं, मैं ज्यादा खुश हूँ, मैं ज्यादा पुश करूंगा. मुझे ये लगता है रोड्स का ये कनेक्शन भी है बहुत तगड़ा वाला.
Bilkul. With lots of things. I had a friend who told me the other day. He said, "Have you seen the T2 in Bangalore?" I said, "I have not seen it. The new thing." A Delhi friend. He was so amazed by it. He said on the return, when I landed, I saw it. On my return, I actually told them I want to go early and spend 3-4 hours in the airport. So now you're having that. And that's an incentive for commerce. That's an incentive for trade, for a lot of other things, So what you brought out, from frustration to happiness in a lot of this.
Yes.
That's, I think, very, very important point you make.
Bangalore airport, we spend like $1 billion or something. It's a lot of money which we spend on that airport to make it beautiful. तो अभी तो क्या है कि if you move in the streets as well, नोएडा में जाओगे, आप दिल्ली में जाओ, तो पहले क्या था, हम जैसे ओवरब्रिज बना दिया, तो उस पे हम पिक्चर्स नहीं बनाते थे. Now we make pictures on that. I was like कि इतना पैसा आ गया हमारे पास कि चलो ब्रिज भी बना रहे हैं, उस पे पिक्चर्स भी पेंट कर रहे हैं. फॉर एग्जांपल, अगर इस पे जाता है ना, वो वाला जो सेक्टर 18 जाता है ना हाईवे, उसमें अगर नीचे तो चलेगा, तो पूरे हाईवे पे तेरे को ना महाराजा उग्रसेन की, भगवान कृष्ण की, और एंड दे आर सो प्रिटी. ऐसा नहीं है कि मतलब किसी कलाकार को पकड़ लिया. दे हैव मेड ब्यूटीफुल पिक्चर्स, भगवान शिवाजी की, भगवान कृष्ण की, इसकी उसकी बनाई, एंड इट्स ब्यूटीफुल.
And to say, that also popularizes
That's true.
icons. People are curious to know why they
absolutely.
are. So it has multiple advantages. So it beautifies it. It gives a chance for people to be curious and know. Then there is maybe a little bit competitive politics ki what name you should give or which statue you should put. But overall, it's still, to my mind, it's a bit beneficial because it starts venerating and honoring local heroes or national heroes.
Absolutely. अब हम थोड़ा इतिहास में वापस लौटते हैं. The Battle of Colachel. The Dutch East India Company's defeat by Travancore's Maharaja Martand Verma.
Yeah.
and the Mukuwars, he took help of the Mukuwars. तो एक तो आप मुझे इस पूरे वॉर के बारे में समझाइए कि क्या हुआ था. और दूसरा, very interesting thing I read that the Dutch asked the church, the Jesuit church, to tell the people who were Christian to fight for the Dutch. And the people of that church, they said, no, we don't betray our king. That's so beautiful.
It is.
Like all the Christians, they recently became Christians. They told the Dutch that नहीं, हम नहीं लड़ेंगे तुम्हारे लिए, हम अपने राजा को betray नहीं करते. This is not what we do. Please tell me this a little bit more about this war, and and this was such a beautiful thing I read.
No, it is beautiful. Sushilji, I must confess that I have not read this war in detail enough to at least, I mean, we can discuss with you, but to be able to take it across to your readers, one would need a bit more. But what broadly happened? See, it had two components. The Dutch were seeking to aggressively come into India. They were competing with the other colonial powers, and Martand-Varma, the king of Travancore, he was quite willing to give them, let's say, trading concessions. But the sort of concessions, most of the colonials always wanted exclusive trading. As today we call it the most favored nation status, though of course MFN also has become extended to others. They wanted exclusion, ki don't just give it to us, don't give it to
anybody else.
मतलब
गर्लफ्रेंड बन जाओ मेरी.
बिल्कुल. और उस वक्त एक चीज हमको ये देखना पड़ता है कि a lot of prosperity of those kingdoms, of the Raja of Kochi, of Travancore, of Calicut, was through maritime trade.
True.
With a lot of people.
Yes.
In fact, even the Marathas. So, if he had done exclusivity, there would have been problems. So it was on that there was a fight. And I think the Dutch overestimated their ability because they had seen previous instances, particularly of the Portuguese who had overcome Indians. So I think they felt a sense of false bravado or confidence.
हल्के में ले लिया उन्होंने.
That is the thing. हल्के में ले लिया. So when they marched their army in, they had not factored for the kind of resistance that the Travancore army would put in. And the fact that the Travancore army not only defeated them, withstood that siege, defeated them, but captured their general and made him sign a peace agreement. I think that is very, very important.
Yes.
In the way as you are pointing out, could it have been a turning point? Possibly yes, possibly no. But uska ek significance ye hai, Sushil sahab, to take your other point that we talk of, जिस तरह हिस्ट्री लिखा जाता है, ये लोग बोलते हैं 1905 में जब जापान ने रशिया को डिफीट किया था वो वॉर में, बैटल ऑफ टोशिमा स्ट्रेट्स में, उस वक्त it was the first time that a nation power defeated the Europeans. So that is the bullshit part.
That's true.
So what has happened is in 1721 the Maratha admiral Kanhoji Angre has defeated a joint Portuguese and English fleet. Martand-Varma has beaten the Dutch. So it is not that we didn't win. We won a lot of them. It is just that sometimes in some odd decisive battles, the luck of the coin went the other way. So I think the significance of this battle was A, it was the defeat of a European power by an Indian power. The Dutch were powerful. And second, that it probably certainly put an end to Dutch colonial aspirations in India. That was the end of it. Then they went to Indonesia.
But don't you think that India was such a big cash cow? If your ambitions in India are dead, that means possibly that you lost a bigger chunk of financial gains which you could have got, because British were supporting their kingdom everywhere from the money from India most of the time.
True.
Yeah.
I suppose the 2 points what you make are relevant. Is it possible that they lost much more than what we think they lost?
True.
So they were completely deprived, and or including morale and general demotivation. Or did they now cut their losses seeing the other colonial powers because they had a firm base in Indonesia? And one of the good things from their perspective with Indonesia was also that there was enough spice coming in from there to fuel some of their aspirations and make sure. So I think it was probably a combination of both. This counterfactual aspect I've not studied it adequately to think that uh, did they give up or were they sort of pushed out. But I think the point that you're making is valid, that Marthand Verma deserves huge amount of recognition for keeping the Dutch out of India.
That's true.
I think, yes, of course.
Can you talk about Kanhoji Angre a little bit? Because, very, very famous admiral of Maratha
Yes.
Navy.
Yes.
mean-
So,
Do you relate yourself with him? Like, whom do you relate the most? कि when I was a commander, मुझे लगता है I can relate with this one bit more. Be it from past or from from recent past or from
my role models would be more in the recent past because you've seen them and
That's
all
true.
that. But I think Kanhoji Angre is remarkable. And he's remarkable again because the entire episode of the Maratha Navy is remarkable. Chatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, the remarkable part about the Maratha Navy, as I was saying, is that the Marathas were fighting powers on land. They were facing hostile situation against Mughals, against Adil Shahis. And they were an interior empire till they broke through the Sahyadris and came to the coast. Initial conquests were interior. But Shivaji Maharaj, who was born in 1630, in 1657 he conquers Kalyan and then realizes the need to have a navy.
Yes.
He's 27-year-old, no? And he establishes a dockyard in Kalyan, Durgada Fort. And within 2 years, ships start rolling out from there. Because he realizes that I can't match the foreigners without building my own ships. And by 1663, 7 years, when he launches an expedition to Basro, an amphibious expedition taking soldiers across, he has more than 80 ships in his fleet. That's remarkable. And he himself is on one of those ships. Very rare that you find a commander-in-chief, on a ship and leading an expedition in battle. A very successful expedition. So by that time, Shivaji Maharaj's reign ends in 1680. The Maratha Navy is reportedly supposed to have 400 ships, 200 warships, 200 merchant marine. He realizes the importance of trade. He realizes the importance of sea forts. He realizes the importance of shipbuilding and self-reliance, जो हम आत्मनिर्भरता बोलते हैं.
जी जी.
So Kanhoji's father, he's already served in the Maratha Navy and for some time under Chatrapati Shivaji Maharaj. So there is certain amount of DNA and Now after Chatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, for a brief time there are ups and downs in the Maratha administration. Of course, Sambhaji Maharaj is a great warrior himself. But the way the navy is nurtured now, it is split into smaller halves and all that. And Kanhoji Angre comes, he gets appointed around 1690 to a deputy sort of admiral or this one. 94 he gets a higher position. And at this point of time in land, the Maratha Empire there are internal fights between Rani Tarabai and Sahu and all that. So who wields the power? So he is now taking over as an admiral at a time when there is a bit of, let's say, tumult and bit of command and control issues of the Maratha Navy. So what is remarkable about Kanhoji Angre is the way he patches. Ultimately, he's recognized by both Kolhapur and Satara sovereigns as the Sarkhel. And then he starts off his journey somewhere in the early part of the 18th century and going around conquers. That is extremely remarkable. So when he passes away in 1729, he has spread the influence of Maratha Navy so much that it is remarkable. And why is it remarkable? For 2 or 3 reasons. One, he is undefeated in battle, and that is so the entire Konkan coast, people are terrified of him. The Europeans are terrified of him. The fact that the British call him a pirate, okay, ये लेफ्ट हैंडेड कॉम्प्लीमेंट है क्योंकि उनके बहुत सारे एडमिरल्स भी वहाँ अटलांटिक में पायरेसी करते थे.
पायरेसी से ब्रिटेन बना ही था.
हाँ बिल्कुल. और इस अंग्रिया बोलते थे उसको. और आज भी मैप में कोंकण वो चार्ट में ज्योग्राफिकल लोकेशन है अंग्रिया बैंक्स करके. ओके. तो इतने डरते थे वो लोग इससे, गाली देते थे, but they were, and in fact Grant Duff, who's a historian of the Marathas but a Britisher, he says that, I mean, he puts Kanhoji Angre as even superior to the British in some ways. Okay. And like I said, he has important battles, the Khanderi battle, which the British tried to take. Marathas are sitting on Khanderi, and Khanderi is strategic because to their north is the British inside Mumbai, to their south are the Siddhis in Janjira. So by occupying this, he is keeping a good watch on them. So British desperately try to take Khanderi many times. They are unsuccessful. So he is successful in battle. He has created a scene of terror. He's also brought back the Maratha glory. Ships are being built. But the Maratha Navy tactics now, the clever use of galbats, gurabs or grabs as they're called, sea forts, drawing the British ships in and using the sea forts to give gunfire support, or towing the ships which have cannons, right under the nose of bigger British ships they can't see, and then fire. Even though they were technologically inferior to the Europeans, by clever tactics and lots of courage, defeated Britishers, and that's remarkable. So he, in some ways, created battlefield conditions, and he also continued to build ships, realizing. Most important, Sushilji, is this: Kanhoji Angre openly challenged the Portuguese Kartas, the Europeans' permit system. The Indian Ocean, the Arabian Sea was free to all, what we call global commons. When the Portuguese came, they said just to travel and trade, you need the Kartas. You need our license, and without that, you will be, and they would mercilessly punish, kill, torture people.
So they were the real pirates.
Of course, of course. एंड दे सेड ऑल्सो, इनका एक फेमस स्टेटमेंट है कि जो हम बोलते हैं ओपन सीज एंड ऑल, वो यूरोप के लिए है, बिकॉज वी आर द मास्टर्स ऑफ दिस ओशन, वी डिसाइड व्हाट वी डू, दैट्स देयर, आई मीन दे आर आर्ग्यूइंग दैट कि हम दादागिरी करेंगे और कर सकते हैं. So what Kanhoji did is he challenged Dadagiri. Not only he stopped taking their permits, he issued his permit system, the dastak and call, his permit system. So ships that did not carry his permit. Now this is a direct, challenge to them, and they couldn't do anything while he was there. In fact, by the end of his tenure, the European Portuguese power was on decline. Of course, the British stayed for various reasons. But this sort of challenge. So these are, we don't realize it. These are some of the earliest assertions of Indian sovereignty. Telling them, because that thing bore his chinna, his stamp. So he was not merely fighting as a subordinate, or he was fighting for Swaraj. He was fighting for his kingdom.
चलिए एक और सवाल आता है, बहुत इंटरेस्टिंग है, आई एम श्योर ये सवाल आपको दुखती रग पे लगेगा. सवाल ये है कि बाजीराव पेशवा, right, and Kanhoji Angre was the king of the seas, right, and he did bigger things than Bajirao, right? But why that Bajirao is more famous? Bajirao's name is on every kid's जबान पे, सबके बाजीराव का नाम है, क्योंकि जमीन पे. तो मैं जानना चाहता हूँ कि नेवी में कितना भी कमाल कर लो, हीरो जमीन वाले ही क्यों बनते हैं?
ये आपको बताना चाहिए. You need to tell that.
Because Kanhoji Angre is a great guy. Right?
He's a great guy. I must tell you this. I was just about 15 years back. I was there at a very important function in Pune, which celebrated the Battle of Kundana. Tanaji Malusare's Singhad, taking over of Singhad from Uday Bhan. It's been made into a movie also. So that is celebrated as a Kundana Day. The Maratha लाइट इन्फेंट्री का वो रेजिमेंटल डे भी होता है. तो पुणे में बड़ा सा फंक्शन था, एंड लॉट्स ऑफ descendants of the Peshwas had also come on this one. So we need to, I gave a talk on the Maratha Navy, and we need to, because a lot of people, it begins with Maharashtrians and Marathas taking as much pride in their navy as they take in their army and land forces. The Peshwas, beginning from the first one to the last, did amazing exploits, and they are known. Maybe because they built an empire, because ultimately the Maratha Empire at its peak, spread, as they say, from Katak to Atak, So certainly we must celebrate and worship and commemorate that. But why not the Angre? तो मैंने उस मीटिंग में बोला कि यार हम जब पोनियन सेल्वन की तरह बनाते हैं, कान्होजी आंग्रे में बनाओ, क्योंकि he fought. He's a man who's fought. He's a man who's this one, and you can make मतलब such a romantic, such a dashing, such a great figure. And incidentally, Kanhoji Angre himself belonging to the coast, and Peshwas are coastal people who went to Pune. So there is a lot of closeness. Ultimately, of course, long after Kanhoji Angre in 1755-56, when his children were looking after the navy, unfortunate turn of event, the Peshwas sided with the British, and that is how the Maratha navy lost its shine or sheen or its power. But I think the bigger thing you're making is, are our people on land enough? That is true everywhere. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not being 1 inch disrespectful to Sam Bahadur, Field Marshal Manekshaw, certainly. But today you ask people, they'll say 71 mein who led the army? They know, or many know Sam Bahadur. Yeah, at least, even if they don't know who led the army, if you tell them, do you know about Field Marshal Manekshaw, people will say. If you ask someone who was the head of Navy in 71 war,
Even I don't know.
and the Indian Navy in 71 war did as super exploits. In fact, that is what I keep telling. Yeah, without the Indian Navy in the war, you can argue that maybe some results may have been different. I don't know.
have read that because they were attacking Karachi so badly, that the focus of Pakistanis were diverted in several directions.
Of course, they were. And look at the psychological demotivation when your main city is hit and plummeted. You see, many actions that take in the interiors up for a government, it's easy to say, nahi, nahi, aise nahi, ye ho raha hai. Or in Bangladesh, at best, West Pakistan could cut itself off. But what do you do when your main city by the coast is attacked and made a wreck? It's made a mess. And ships don't come any longer. Ships that are coming to Pakistan ask Indian Navy for permission. So I think on the whole, and I can take this point much further, that there is a lack of recognition of Navy and maritime exploits in our annals of iconography or heroizing people. I don't want to call it hero worship, but genuinely, जब हम national heroes को देखते हैं, we don't think of people from the seas and astronauts की बात की. Certainly, we must. But you would be aware, Sushilji, that we have an Indian called Abhilash Tomy who has sailed around the world single-handed, non-stop, twice, on a मतलब छोटी सी, it's perhaps a little bigger than this room, small ship, no engines, just wind power, okay,
Wow.
sailing around the world non-stop and solo, the only person. 6 to 9 months these voyages take. There's one person against the elements of the sea. Now India has, if you include Abhilash Tomy, before that Dilip Tode, we have 8 people, in this club. Abhilash Tomy has done it twice. If I tell you that the club of solo circumnavigators is smaller than the club that has climbed Mount Everest and people who've gone into outer space. हम आज राकेश शर्मा को वर्शिप करते हैं, करना चाहिए. He's a hero. But the number of people who've sailed around the world is far less than the number of people who've gone into space. And India has done it twice. And Abhilash Tomy. And Abhilash Tomy का एक और remarkable achievement है कि first time उसने 2013 में किया था. Second time 2018 he went for around the world Golden Globe race. And when he was in the third position, I think he was hit badly by the worst seas in southern Indian Ocean. His vessel was dismasted, it fell, he sent out a SOS, his back was broken, he was lying in that ship. He was lying for about 4 days till he was rescued. He couldn't get up, he was sipping iced tea from where he could reach his hand. He had to be evacuated. A spinal surgery was done. His vertebrae have been fused together with titanium rods. And what does this man think at that time? When do I go back to racing again? And last year he sailed in another around the world. It's called Golden Globe race, where you do this. And in this he stood second.
Wow.
Just narrowly, very narrowly missing the first position. इसके बारे में हम जानते भी नहीं है, उसको कोई भी awards नहीं मिले हमको, मतलब when we talk of say the Padma awards or this one or something like that. To my mind, Abhilash Tomy is India's greatest sporting achievement, because being for 8 or 9 months alone, endurance, and when he went on this current thing also, by the time he finished, much of his sails, everything had been torn, everything had been frayed. And you can't, in this, you can't use GPS, you can't use modern communication system, because they had to sail like the first person sailed in 1968. So he's using stars for navigation. हम इनके बारे में जानते नहीं हैं.
नहीं, I'm not aware.
We should make movies about these sort of
But
things.
let me movies पे मैं बताता हूँ आपसे. नेवी की मूवीज महंगी पड़ती हैं. You don't understand
I
that.
agree. I agree.
नेवी की लैंड की मूवी सस्ती है. आप बनाओ, बाद घोड़े ले आओ, तलवार ले आओ, होगी बात
I
खत्म. नेवी की मूवीज यू हैव टू फर्स्ट क्रिएट दैट शिप, है ना. तो महंगी पड़ती हैं, इस चक्कर में शायद मूवीज नहीं बना पाते ये लोग.
वो बात मैं मानता हूँ.
हाँ हाँ हाँ.
And we have to find a way out of that.
Yeah, we have to find a way out of that, because we have to tell the stories. So going back to, I would like to take you away from India. Let's talk about Zheng He, or Heng He, the way Chinese do. I'm sure you are aware about this particular person. He was a eunuch. I mean, made eunuch by Shang dynasty, if I'm not wrong. उसके बारे में बताइए. मतलब, was he not a hero of the world navy? अगर उसको देखोगे आप तो, I mean, he didn't like India and in the Indian powers. उसमें बहुत सारे चोलाज और उसके बीच लड़ाइयाँ भी हो रखी हैं. बट मैं अदरवाइज बोल रहा हूँ, अगर वर्ल्ड के लेवल पे देखोगे, he had the biggest ship in the world. Like, जितनी बड़ी उसकी शिप थी, उसके आगे यूरोपियन शिप जो कोलंबस वगैरह चलाते थे, और लाइक बेबी खिलौने वाली बात हो गई, क्योंकि उसके शिप में 30,000 लोग चलते थे एक साथ में. इतनी बड़ी शिप बनाई थी उसने. तो could you please elaborate on this guy?
Zheng He, or Tungha, or as it's called. There's no doubt that he would rate as one of the great maritime heroes of all time and of his time. There is no doubt. The fact that he sailed, the fact that he was the eunuch admiral,
True.
you know.
So more power to transgender. More power to woke.
No. So he certainly, any independent evaluation will say that he was one of the greatest. Having said that, the issue again comes back when we talk of the scale and majesty of his ships. A lot of people believe that this is later, let's say, I wouldn't say gloss, but perhaps a little bit of overstretch or over imagination. I can't comment on the veracity of that, because you see, what happened is, after Zheng He passed away, 1432, I think, and then very shortly after that, the Chinese decided that they must not
They don't need ships anymore.
They shut out that. They burnt all the records. They burned them.
They burned the ships as well. I mean,
Yes.
how stupid was that?
Exactly. Very stupid. Now, you see, a slight digression. This is the thing that happens. The Chinese and the Indians sort of turn their backs to the sea around the same time. Indians maybe after the Cholas by the 13th or 14th century, the Chinese. And this is the same time that 1415 wo Henry the Navigator starts expedition. 1439 or so, your Gutenberg, the printing press is invented, so knowledge spreads. 1454, fall of Constantinople, so now the Turks are pressing, so they have to find a different route, and that is when their expeditions start. And then you have Christopher Columbus. And so 15th century is interesting, because you have two great maritime giants who've turned their backs, and that is the same time, by this great coincidence in history, that the Europeans are looking to the seas. So when they turn around and say कि ये age of enlightenment exploration, they have to be reminded that the world has had several ages like that
That's true.
before, but it was one of those great fortunes of time or fate or whatever, that there was no. So when they came here, there was not the kind of resistance, knowledge, or people had turned their backs. So going back therefore to Tungha, because of lack of records, many people believe that subsequent recreations have tended to sort of
To make him bigger.
make him bigger.
तो चाइना के वो है भी थोड़ा सा.
Exactly.
चाइना की
That is-
प्रॉब्लम
that
है.
is the
हाँ,
thing.
हाँ.
And I think there is that author who has written a book, When China Conquered the World, or something like that. A Western author. Many people believe again that he was secretly commissioned or influenced to do it. So that they have done. And so, for example, if you go to this Sentosa Island in Singapore, you have now a huge maritime museum, and apparently the Chinese have funded that or whatever, or they are running it, which gives an impression of the Chinese. So there, to show how big they are, they have put live giraffes, or live meaning life-size models of giraffes and things like that. The giraffes were transported ships, very big. But were they this big? Were they so many in number? Were they so many in this way? There are some well-intended questions. It's not to cast any sort of slur on him. But yes, I mean, remarkable.
But what do you think about Chinese integrity issues? There are a lot of issues in integrity of even in history. For example, that thing which they found, that pyramid and they found that they're clay soldiers and this and that. So there are a lot of American ASI, American archaeological people who said that that's bullshit. It's not. They made it, and they didn't allow anybody to visit because they all kept applying for that. We want to see this, such a great finding. They allowed only one French guy, if I'm not wrong. They didn't allow anybody. Now what they do is they allow you to tour it. When they were doing excavation, they didn't allow anybody. Now they would allow you to जाके देख लो, excavation मत करने आओ. अभी recently क्या इन्होंने एक वो ढूंढा है, fossils of a क्या है वो dragon. चाइना में ड्रैगन का फॉसिल मिला. And I was like, I don't think ऐसा कुछ है. मुझे चाइनीज के जो ये जो आर्कियोलॉजिकल उसमें से बहुत डाउट होता है चाइना के ऊपर. मुझे सीरियस डाउट्स होते हैं.
See, we'll keep some parts of the record. Basically, the thing is like that. If you want to be, I'm just giving you my view. If you want to be a little understanding or kind to them, I think they have one issue. They certainly were one of the great ancient civilizations.
No doubt. No
Okay.
doubt.
Now, for a long time, there was a fracture when the communists took over, because unlike in our case where whatever it is, there was a link to that. I think they were confused ki, yaar, how much of us? It is the same problem for the Pakis. Do they claim the Indus Valley civilization in which...
सोच के देखो ना, वो ज़्यादा better है.
हाँ.
Like Indus Valley civilization, you will be like the big 5,000-year-old, 7,000. Even the Mehergarh was like 9,000-year-old
Then
civilization.
the problem will be that you will have to accept that before certain period also there was great
If
things
we are not
happening.
Arabs or Turks, then we are Indians. We don't want to be Indians.
So that's the problem. So like that with Chinese during the early phase of communism and perhaps several phases before, there's been this great obscuring of the past, and then, but they were a great civilization. They built things, they created art, they went around, and they have a sense of exceptionalism, that middle kingdom thing. Ki bhai, there is the heaven and there is the earth, and we are the middle kingdom. We are somewhere above all the rest of the people. Which is why their concept of, of their kings, this one, sovereignty or suzerainty was different. Ki aap bas maan lo ki wo, he is good, he is big, he is magnificent, then he will shower you with hospitality, he will give you
ये
gift.
तो वही वाला जोक हो गया ना कि मैं बहुत शानदार तलवारबाज हूँ, बोलने से काम चल जाएगा, दिखाना पड़ेगा.
So their model was, you pay us that respect and you live, enjoy your life. Which some people did, many didn't. But there is this constant hearkening for recognition. And the way they took colonialism and being conquered by Japanese and all, they saw it as a severe dent to their national pride, as insulting. I don't know if India, we talk of decolonization, this, that, but India hasn't. Our experiences with British have been that we have absorbed, taken, embraced, So you have to see their mentality from that. Ki the basic Chinese mentality today, as they are growing, this one is to say, we are bigger and better in everything. Right? No? So they have that this one of saying,
No one is better than us.
Now that translates into often these exaggerations or overdoing things or saying we have found this, we have found that, seeing and of gigantism, scale. They want to have everything gigantic, the Great Wall and this one. So now they want to build big ships, they want to build big townships. Some of them may not have anyone there.
Some of them, most of them.
Okay. So that craze for gigantism is that we want to be seen as word beaters. So now they're often, that's where these integrity issues that you can come in, because obviously you can't maintain it across all these things, There is a saying that इनको अफ्रीका के साथ दोस्ती बनाना था, तो they wanted to go back to say Zheng He के टाइम में यहाँ हमारे जहाज आए थे, but they sponsored a diving expedition of Malindi and Lamu and all that to show that there are ancient Chinese, right? Okay, and they brought out some stuff which many people say their divers took down and
पुलिस वाली बात हो गई ना कि तेरे पास ड्रग्स है, नहीं मेरे पास नहीं, ये रहे तेरे पास ड्रग्स है.
Yeah, exactly like that. Many people say they really do that and get it up and all that. So I, that is the issue. Like this dinosaur skeleton, they're not happy with what they have. Also, they don't seem to understand criticism. Apparently when Deng Xiaoping came to India and he saw some demonstrations in China. He told Nehru, इनको चुप क्यों नहीं कराते हो तुम? And Pandit ji had to tell him, यार ऐसे नहीं होता है हमारे country में. Huh? So even today for them it is the same. Yesterday I was hearing someone that when the Chinese diplomats in Delhi and all, when they see something critical written about them, they call those journalists or authors and says, how dare you write? You know? So वो बंदे
यूएस में तो मूवी नहीं बनाने देते. यूएस में मूवी नहीं बनाने देते हैं वहाँ पे, मतलब पैसा फंडिंग बंद कर देते हैं.
बिल्कुल.
इवन देयर वाज अ मैनेजर हु सपोर्टेड दैट कंट्री, जो चाइना का जिस बोलते हैं हमारा है, ताइवान. सो द मैनेजर ऑफ हिल्टन होटल्स रोट अ ट्विटर, मैनेजर को फायर करवा दिया. अरे मैनेजर है, नोबडी, उसको फायर करवाया उन्होंने कि कैसे लिख दिया.
अभी देखो, यू सी द मैनेजमेंट और मिसमैनेजमेंट ऑफ कोविड. और कोई भी कंट्री होता ना, they would have been such bad press, they would have been hauled over the coals. We still don't know the origins, what, how it happened. Imagine अगर ये इंडिया में होता, by God, by chance.
हमारे यहाँ निपा वायरस था, we controlled it. हमारे यहाँ पे इतने सारी चीजें.
Things would have been told, dirty country, ये वो, so much slurs, insinuations would have happened. Now it's happened there, they have bought their way, they have this one.
Thank God America had Donald Trump. He made sure that people know it's a Chinese virus.
Yes.
Thank God he was there. Otherwise America would have like, नहीं कुछ नहीं है, China कोई हाथ नहीं है.
बिल्कुल, because China has bought in enough into America now.
वो कोशिश देखी थी आप लोग आपने, जो when Donald Trump started saying it's a Chinese virus, so CNN used to send Chinese looking people in Donald Trump's press conference so they can say, are you saying it's me? Come on now. I mean, he's saying something else.
He's saying something else.
Yeah.
Over wokeism, no?
हाँ, over करके.
So that is where they're not happy having 90 out of 100. उनको 101 out of 100 चाहिए every time and the vote.
नहीं, उनको 99 चाहिए ना. एक अगेंस्ट वोट करेगा ना.
तो उसमें फिर वो थोड़ा बहुत एथिक्स, थोड़ा बहुत एडजस्टमेंट, थोड़ा बहुत मान लो, वो आ जाता है.
तेरे को नहीं पता चाइना में इलेक्शन होते हैं. You don't know that China is a democracy. तूने वो याद नहीं जो एक मूवी आई थी यार, द डिक्टेटर, उसमें नहीं चाइनीज बिजनेसमैन होता है, चाइना इज अ डेमोक्रेसी टू, और हंसने लग जाता है जोर से. उसमें क्या होता है सनी कि 99 लोग प्रेसिडेंट जी को वोट डालेंगे, एक बंदा अगेंस्ट डालेगा, वो भी जी बोलेगा उसको कि तो अगेंस्ट डाल, बिकॉज इट्स अ डेमोक्रेसी.
So those are, and that is why now.
वैसे ज़ेंग हे का आप ये कह रहे हो क्वेश्चनेबल है.
मैं ये नहीं बोल रहा हूँ कि क्वेश्चनेबल है, मैं ये बोल रहा हूँ
कुछ लोगों ने क्वेश्चन करे हैं.
कुछ वेल इंटेंडेड स्कॉलर्स ने, they have raised questions about whether the extent of magnificence and spectacularity was as is being depicted today, without taking away from the fact that he was a great maritime man.
ठीक है, politically correct, I give you that without a doubt. ठीक है, let's talk about before we jump on the future of Indian Navy, let's go back to that. A lot of Indians don't know that the freedom of India was given to Indians because of the Navy. They don't know that. Could you please elaborate on that?
Yes, I mean,
And no need to be political on that.
No, I'm not being political.
Politically correct होने की जरूरत नहीं है इसमें.
As an academic, I don't use definitive sentences. Yes, but what you brought out, many people in India are not aware of the Royal Indian Navy uprising of February 1946, which in some ways or many ways can be called as the last war of independence. If 1857 was the first war, again there were probably resistance movements before 1857, and this factor has not been known enough. So basically I'll tell you what happened and then why it is important. What happened is, in World War II, the Royal Indian Navy was the smallest service. It expanded hugely. Strength went up 15-20 fold. And please remember, unlike the Indian Army, which was fairly big because the colonials wanted the Indian Army as a part of their colonial conquering apparatus to go to different parts of the world, and the Air Force in some ways to support that, the Indian Navy component was kept very small because the Britishers believed that the blue water operation should always be their navy, the Royal Navy. Royal Indian Navy सिर्फ थोड़ा coastal defense करे, mining करे, hydrography survey करे, उतना बस. तो उन different versions of Indian Navy's earlier avatars followed that pattern. And 1934 में जब ये Royal Indian Navy establish हुआ, शुरू में यही उनका कोशिश था. So they said, you be small chotkus and we will. Why? Again, important. Because they realized at some point of time when India gains independence, Indian Army and Air Force will not come, but the navies, because they go across oceans, if you make too big an Indian Navy, it will be a threat to us, to our global this one. So they deliberately kept it small. And they were forced to expand it in World War II. The Royal Indian Navy gave a fantastic performance. And after the war, there was a general feeling that कि भाई अब कुछ अच्छा होगा. Sailors who had joined were promised jobs. They were, they were promised better living, staying conditions. But what happened after the war was the reverse. Now Britain was staring at penury. They had got exhausted. So the new idea was now to demobilize or reduce the number of people. And this was done very, very shabbily in case of Indian Navy in Bombay. And there is a place called HMIS Talwar, which is a shore establishment in Bombay's Colaba area. वहाँ पे ये demobilization center था. वो by coincidence it was also the communications center of it was the communication school training establishment of the Navy. So on 18th February 1946, after a lot of series of smaller incidents which I'll not go in, the sailors at Talwar rose in revolt against the British. And they very cleverly used the communication circuits, channels available there, the equipment. And within a day or two, across India, more than 20,000 sailors, about 78 ships and establishment from as west as, Aden and as east as Indonesia in some way or other joined, and bulk of Indian Navy, Karachi, Jamnagar, Calcutta, Madras, Vishakhapatnam, Kochi, joined this revolt. So that was a big jhatka to the British. And they were now. So what the British tried to, they called it the mutiny, and they tried to dismiss it as saying it is grievances arising out of food, treatment, ye wo. Now food treatment is like the immediate cause, the spark, as we have seen even in 1857, it was about the cartridge. But it's not about that alone. It's about so many things. And it was very, very political in nature. The sailors who spearheaded it had amazing political chutzpah. They were very smart. They also took over the ammunition depot, the Butcher Island. They took over ships. They brought down the British flags. They raised a combined flag of Congress, Muslim League, and the Communists. They pointed guns at Gateway, Royal Bombay Yacht Club, and perceived colonial establishments. So it was in many ways a fight for freedom, because now they had got fed up with British. The kind of slogan.
The people who say that that it was because of the Red Fort proceedings
Of
against.
course it was. Of course it was. They were inspired by the INA trials. They called themselves the Azad Hindis. They set up, since this was Indian National Army, that Netaji said. That is a part. So since they set up, this was the Indian National Army. They called themselves the Indian National Navy in those 3 or 4 days. See, the funny part is, and that contributed in some way both to its early finishing or not being given that credit. Unlike the INA, which had Netaji as a spearhead and he became the great icon, the great one, this naval uprising was led by a bunch of people in their 20s. The mean age was 17 to 24, 25. And their leaders were all probably, around, they were kids. So there were people called M.S. Khan, Madan Singh, B.C. Dutt, Rishi Puri. So all of them were young Indian Navy sailors. And they actually formed a strike committee. They called it strike. They called it a naval strike coordination strike committee or something like that. So they tried to deal in a consensual way, talking to the leaders of Congress and Muslim League at that time and things like that, who didn't encourage enough. Now there are various reasons given for that, including that at that time the political parties were coming close to realization of their own dreams of transfer of power to them, and they didn't want any interference or anything with this. So whatever it is, the fact remains. Why is it important, Sushilji? Is for 2 or 3 reasons. One is the extent of its spread and the spontaneity of the outburst was, I think, surprised everyone. And the British realized that as long as you hold on to the coercive powers of the state, you can keep a people under control. The moment the armed forces and the other coercive elements of state go out of your control, so the Royal Naval Indian Navy uprising was that. It was a reality check. There is INA trials, there is here. And interestingly, the second point, at that point of time, there were similar revolts, smaller revolts in Royal Indian Air Force and army units. In fact, one happened in Jabalpur just a few days after this. So it seemed to set off certain spontaneous demonstrations elsewhere, spontaneous uprisings elsewhere. So that now became a problem for the British. And what happened? The Indian troops refused to fire at the Royal Indian Navy. Yes.
Yes.
So they had to bring in British troops, they had to bring in British ships from Sri Lanka, Royal Navy ships, they had to have the Air Force do low passes. So they realized, yeah, we've got a situation on our hands. Third thing, the kind of support that citizens of Mumbai gave. I mean, dock hands, mill hands, port workers, everyone, normal citizens came out in support of, particularly in Mumbai. You know, Mumbai, see, the total number from the Navy who died is about 10, and who got injured is about 40, 50. But in Bombay alone, the civilians who died is about 400, and 1500 got injured. The death statistics in naval uprising are the same as Jallianwala Bagh, more or less. But हम जलियांवाला बाग को याद करते हैं, याद करना चाहिए. Okay, but ये uprising को, I mean, it has been completely obliterated.
Intentionally, I would say.
Possibly, I don't know. But point is, it just, so later on when Clement Attlee came to India in the 50s, he was asked what precipitated British exit. And he said specifically, he said that the INA trials and RIN uprising. And when he was asked कि quit India का कितना असर था, he said minimal, zero. Now he may have had his reasons to disparage Mahatma Gandhi. I'm not saying that, because he may not have wanted to give him credit. But the fact remains that in addition to the vector of the Congress, the non-violent movement, there were many other vectors, aggressive movements, revolutionary movements and struggles. And the RIN uprising was one of them. And it was for the kind of signal it gave to the British. I think it was a small uprising that shook the mighty British Empire, as I've called it in an article of mine. And I would think that the last dhakka was given by this one.
तो एक और भी बात है सर कि कई लोग कहते हैं कि दिस वाज द रीज़न वाई जो 48 में पावर ट्रांसफ़र होना था वो इमीडिएटली हो गया कि भाई जाओ जाओ निकलते हैं यहाँ से. एंड दे हैव ऑल्सो अरेंज्ड, क्योंकि उस टाइम पे शायद 2 लाख ब्रिटिश थे यहाँ पे, तो उन्होंने बोट्स अरेंज करवाई थी अलग अलग पोर्ट्स पे कि भैया भागना है तो हम कैसे भागेंगे. सो दे वर दैट स्केयर्ड बिकॉज ऑफ
They
दिस
were
ओनली.
certainly scared. And certainly it was hastened. Look, 18th this happened, and on the 19th of February 46, Britain announced the Cripps mission, the cabinet mission, which was ultimately a transfer of power. And my friend Pramod Kapoor, who's written a very good book called 1946, The Last War of Independence, believes that it was this uprising that made them announce the cabinet, this one in a hurry. And one of the members of that mission was the First Lord of Admiralty. So we haven't probably given the due recognition to this movement as being one of the important seminal moments in our freedom struggle.
So let me ask you another question, and I think we have already discussed this, but let me ask you point blank that do you think that the Navy gets less credit in comparison to our armed forces which are on the land?
I wouldn't call it credit, because I think one, of course, credit should go to all and as well. I do believe that Navy or naval forces get less coverage, less attention, less media space, less space in public imagination than the other two services. There are some understandable reasons, because हम जो बोलते हैं maritime, you're operating beyond the horizon. You can't see. You can see the army guys. You can see Air Force planes up. You can't see the warships operating. Even Republic Day, we can't bring naval ships up the Yamuna River. No,
Don't you think it should happen? We should make an arrangement. Don't you think that it should happen? I mean, come on now.
Sometime technology. Let's ask the Chinese.
Yeah, it should happen somehow. कि यार लेके आओ यार, ऐसे तो गलत बात है सरासर.
So there is a lesser understanding of these issues, which then results, as you would say, हम लोग, see, when the Navy talks of credit or something, we don't say that. The larger academic point made by naval scholars and theoreticians is, look, you ignore the seas at your own peril. We lost our freedom to the colonials long back. Today more than 90% of global trade is through the seas. तो
Yes.
हुथीज एक अटैक करते हैं, आपका पूरा सुएज कैनल से राउंड जाना पड़ता है. अब आज सिर्फ इंडियन नेवी है वहाँ पे ज़्यादा जो काम कर रहा है, बट it results in rerouting of trade, increased costs. All those costs are passed on to
The people on the
people.
land. Yeah. So you have, because I think it was INS Vindhyagiri,
Yes.
which you were commanding, right?
Yes.
So let's discuss about INS Khukri's story in 1971 war. And as I told you, like before off the record as well, that that is such an emotional story of Captain MahendraNath Mulla. Could you please tell me about that, and then the letter of Alan Rodriguez, Captain Alan, Commodore, I guess, Alan Rodriguez, who wrote to his daughter. Could you please tell me what has happened? I mean, what exactly has happened, and how does that make you feel as a commander?
Yes, I think this is a very very important story at several levels. One, what happened is that in the 1971 war, Khukri, Kotar and Kirpan were part of the Western Fleet. They had sailed out on the 2nd of December, just before the war broke out, as a part of Western Fleet deployment for the war. And 3 or 4 days later, Kotar had a engine room failure, so she was to return back. But because it was war, Kirpan towed her back because Kotar could not, move on own power, and Khukri escorted them back into the harbor. So they came back, and Kotar was, escorted safely, and she could not sail any longer. And at this point of time, the Navy got this intelligence about the presence of a Pakistani submarine of Diu. So immediately,
Daman and Diu.
Uh,
Yeah.
so immediately next day, Khukri and Kirpan were sailed on a hunter-killer mission to attack and get the submarine. Now you have to understand a few things in our context. One, in any battle between the ship and a submarine, the submarine has a certain advantage because she's down
It's
below.
like that mountain war, right?
Yes.
The people on the top have
Yes.
advantage.
So here a person at lesser depth or
Yes,
depth at
yes,
bottom
yes,
has
yes.
advantage because she's hidden, and she can make out a ship's presence much before a ship can make out the presence of a submarine. That gets even more accentuated in warm waters of the Indian Ocean, where a submarine detects a ship much before. And the Hangor, being a Daphne class submarine, was, as it is, more advanced than the Khukri class, which were somewhat older vintage ships. And now, because Kothar was not there, there were only 2 ships. So these were at a disadvantage when they went out for this hunter-killer mission. Why I'm telling you this is, when Captain Mulla was sent and he was being the senior, he was made in charge of this mission, I'm sure he would have realized that this is a difficult situation. I'm sure he would have realized that perhaps the odds were against him. So they went, and when they were doing their, uh, patrolling there of the waters of Diu, they were detected by Angor, which, fired torpedoes. Again, kismat ki baat hai, it fired at Kirpan, missed, fired at Khukri, hit. And now a torpedo fired at a ship usually gets, perhaps arguably more than the missiles, because when you hit underwater, in addition to all the damages, the stability because of water gushing in happens very quickly. And if you hit close to the engine room or generator, the power goes off and all that. So that is exactly what happened on Khukri. The 2 hits happened within a couple of minutes of each other. And before Khukri could respond to the first hit, the second hit happened. And, she sank rapidly thereafter. Now, as you brought out, what Captain Mulla, who was sitting in the bridge of the ship throughout, and this is there from various, reports that he was there in the bridge, he was there, they were constantly monitoring. Moment he had the first ship hit, he realized something had gone wrong. By the time second ship, he gave orders to abandon the ship. He realized that, it can't be said, and these are quick judgment calls. And as many people as he could put out, he sent them off. And when he was told by someone that you come out, he said, don't worry about me. From all accounts, he handed over his own life jacket to another sailor. Push some people, because it takes guts to jump into a sea at night. And all this in a matter of couple of minutes. And then went down with his ship. He was last seen sitting on the bridge, whatever. So now, the important thing here is a man who goes against all odds. His ship is hit. He doesn't leave the ship. He sends as many people as he can, and he goes down with the ship. So
And he could have been out the first if he wanted
have
to.
been out the first if he wanted. So this is an act of supreme sacrifice, consciously done. Often people die, and with no disrespect to them, it happens unself-consciously or subconsciously. You don't know. Here there was a conscious decision to go down with the ship, and that is a supreme act of sacrifice. Now, why is this important? I'll unpack that for various reasons, and this is where the letter of Captain Rodrigues comes. First, it must be known that Captain Rodrigues' letter was in response to an article
Written by his daughter.
Amita
Yes.
Mulla, who talked of, and that article is very poignant too. Why he attempted to find out why did my father go down. And she said, that's because that's the only thing he knew to do. And then Rodrigues replies, trying to give it a more conceptual framework, explaining the Navy and trying to, weave a greater pattern into why that happened. And both are, I believe, both should be made compulsory reading to every Indian.
That's true.
So what is important here is Captain Mulla realized that there were people left behind in the ship. And he realized that there are people in engine rooms, there are people in different parts. In a ship, Sushilji, everything operates on trust. A person sitting in the lowest bowels of the ship in the engine room trusts that his captain will do the right thing. Trust that his captain is with him. A person cooking in the galley, a person in the aft steering position, a person in the generators, a person in the ammunition room. They all are operating several decks below in different rooms only on the understanding कि हम सब एक साथ हैं. That is why we say in the Navy, you either swim together or sink together. If Captain Mulla had left his ship and gone, he would have left his shipmates and gone, some of them. He was deeply conscious of that. And he said that if I'm not going to get them out, I'm going to go down with them. This act of supreme sacrifice is important for the way in it establishes the cardinal principle I told you of swimming together, of sinking together, of teamwork. Also, it gave, please remember that the Indian Navy was less than 25 years old in 1971, 24 years. It gave for the Navy an example, a lodestar in terms of behavior, morality, leadership, ethics. What and how should a person be and behave when faced with a situation like this? To willingly जो बोलते हैं ना मौत को वो embrace करते हैं और किसी को मतलब ये नहीं कि हम सबको डर लगता है. Courage is overcoming fearlessness. So that act, not only for a young Navy to have this early on, provided that, it was in the context of 71 war, which we won thumpingly. And believe me, none of us would have liked Khukri to happen. We would have wanted it to be a grand victory with not this loss. But that loss in many ways has provided us a kind of leadership, example, someone to commemorate, someone to venerate for centuries, for ages.
True.
It provided a young Navy one of its finest examples of leadership in courage under fire. So that is third, at a more mundane but equally important level. It also taught, like I said, when a Navy saw loss and people dying, I think it quickly realized 2 or 3 things to be done. One, at the operational level, enhance our sonars, as Captain Rodrigues later brings out. Those days the quality of sonars were not good. So Indian Navy put its greatest R&D efforts on getting an indigenous sonar, and that, if you permit me, in the next question I'll tell you why that's also another sterling achievement by India. We made a sonar for Indian conditions. Okay, there was science and technology impetus. There was greater impetus on anti-submarine warfare, realizing the disadvantages. And also at an administrative level, how to look after families and people who sacrificed there for the country. So these were important lessons for a young country. And example of leadership, see, Captain Mulla was a very well known. He was a fine figure. Everyone knew him. Very handsome person. He was given to Shero Shairi. He was from Allahabad, very cultured family, legal background. So he was supposed to be a very sharp mind. He was sought by prosecution and defense alike to be the lawyer during court martials. So he had a fantastic life ahead of him. So he gave
So
it all.
when you were part of first of all, how did it felt when you were granted a ship to command? What was that moment? How did you
It
feel?
is super thrill because you join the Navy. See, in the Army, Navy, it's a reasonable ambition to have. Not everyone can become a general or admiral. A reasonable ambition to have is to command a unit, to command your battalion, and so on. In the Navy, it's to command a ship. So it is, when it is announced, it is a super thrilling moment. It is something you work for. I got the Vindhyagiri command in 2004 when I had done 18 years of service. You work for that all the moment. You also conscious suddenly of, now you are transitioning. This is about responsibility. Until then you had different levels of responsibility, but now this is, and when you take over the captain, once you sail, everyone looks to you. As in the old saying, I'm not the first captain nor the last, but to every captain of a ship goes through these feelings of some sense of awe, some sense of intimidation, some sense of responsibility, some sense of acceleration. All of that combines.
And a little bit of MahendraNath Mulla's thought.
He is, see,
The thought that,
the
if the
thought
situation comes,
that
I have to be the
of
example.
course, it goes with everyone. It goes with everyone that should you ever, God forbid you don't face this situation, but should you face this situation, God help me to be brave, to do the right and correct thing and not chicken out at that time. And that is where examples provided by your predecessors are very important. And I'm telling you that the Indian Navy has had. There have been people like Kuntal Wadhwa on the INS Calcutta. Before it was commissioned, there was a fire in engine room.
Yes.
And he rescued those people. There was a trial going on for a new system. He could have very well said, "Ye dockyard liability hai, main kya karu?" There's Firdos Mughal on a submarine, jumped out of a submarine, rescued people, and back lost his own wife. So the Navy is providing even today constant examples of that leadership where you are leading from the front, as indeed the Army and the Air Force. So command of a warship is all about leadership. It is about taking these decisions. It's also, you have to be simultaneously, uh, how uh, leadership in armed forces is different from rest of the society. It is both reflex action and reflection. So it's both. So at one level, you're immediately responding to tuck, 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 because you do a split second late, you could be.
That's true.
Other hand, it's also about vast reflection. Thought, why are you doing this one? How do you handle discipline cases? How do you handle companion? You have 200, 300 people. My second ship, Jalashwa, which I commanded, 500 people. So each sailor is a human being. He has
Were they
independent problem.
nuclear armed as well? No.
No.
Okay.
So all these challenges are there.
Okay, one more thing that that when you were commanding these ships, did you got into a situation when you got an intelligence that there might be some submarines around here or things like that?
See, one, of course, it would not be fair to tell because these are still live situations. Did I get into any warlike situation? No. But the job of navies is to ensure that you are well prepared so that there is no war. It is deterrence. But were there inputs about, let's say the Navy has to do, with no disrespect, unlike the Army and Air Force, you also look after several things at sea, what is called good order at sea. So whether it's illegal fishing, piracy,
That's true.
counterterrorism, gun running, dissemination. So there are always these conditions or situations where you have to go, find, ascertain you're being sent, or it's on a search and rescue mission. When I was a navigator of a minesweeper in 89, there was a couple of accidents of Bombay. You have to sail out quickly. Sometimes you rescue people, sometimes you have to remove the dead bodies, but it is still you are ensuring closure for someone. So when I commanded ships, there may have been some situations where you had to react to either policing situation or constabulary situations, and such inputs were there. But inputs about submarines and all that, I don't think it would be correct for me to-
Also one more thing that now I think they're investing a lot of money in coast guards because they want navy to be apart from the coast guards. पहले क्या नेवी ही दिखती थी, कोस्ट को भी नेवी को ही बोला जाता देखने के लिए. Now India is developing its own. और इंडिया कितना बड़ा कोस्ट है. सबसे बड़ी प्रॉब्लम इतने बड़े कोस्ट की है, मतलब लाइक लुक एट आवर मैप,
Yeah.
पूरा कोस्ट ही तो है उधर से लेके
बिल्कुल
उधर
बिल्कुल
तक.
देखिए you brought a right point. For long we have gone on this figure of 7,500 kilometers का coastline, and the new figures are expected to come out shortly, and it's more than 11,000 kilometers
हाँ
now.
हाँ.
And it's not that your coast has increased, it is just that your measurement systems have become more accurate and better. The point is, this is a vast coastline to defend, and you're right. So there is a coast guard now, and the coast guard is being strengthened on its own. The coast guard began, actually it was the navy that proposed we should have a coast guard, because blue water operations are different, close coast operations are different, and the first initial origins of navy were through some origins of coast guard were through some ships taken from navy, and for a long time our officers staffed many, even now many of navy officers are included in coast guard. Their maintenance, much of their training happens with us. So we're like two arms that operate in tandem to keep the seas safe. But it is good to see the coast guard grow too, like you brought out, and increase in strength, because Indian waters and coastline needs that kind of. In fact, I would still believe it is lesser. We need ye dil mange more. But yes, so it's very necessary. It is good that is happening, and it seas and oceans, you can't build fences.
That's true.
You can't keep everything under surveillance. Seas are open to everyone. So your seas beyond 12 nautical miles can be used by any country's navy, merchant navy, and various other actors. So that creates lot of scope for lot of uh, uh, bad guys
That's true.
to be in the waters of our interest. So I think you need both the navy and coast guard to be constant. On sea as well as in land, eternal vigilance is the price of liberty.
That's true. And another thing is that if you look at it, if there is a nuclear holocaust, then the deterrence which you have is submarines,
Yes.
right? If
Yeah.
and also the idea of you populating repopulating the earth also goes on submarines, also goes on sea, right? Because if the land goes down, right, and there is a nuclear holocaust, then then it goes on the sea. People from the sea who will come back and repopulate the earth.
That is a new version of Samudra Manthana. But yes, I mean, ultimately the best deterrence in a nuclear sense can come from the sea-based leg of the triad. And there's no doubt, I mean, this is a part of nuclear theology and nuclear lexicon. And it's necessary for your security, if India wants to have that kind of security, that kind of umbrella over your head, to have the submarine nuclear vector as a deterrent. Your more important point about the sea, I mean, this is what now is being emphasized by government and everyone else, blue economy. That the sea is now not just a site of transportation, of trade or for wars, but in and of itself, it can contain lot of goods of huge economic value. For example, the future of pharma may be with the seaweeds and things, many minerals and polymetallic nodules that you get from sea could sustain your growth infrastructure. And then of course fish, for food
Oil
security,
and
oil
gases.
of course, and gases, extraction energy. So the sea is now the new Kuber ka khazana.
That's true.
And blue economy is about sustainable development, in which security and everything with this one. So when the Prime Minister says security and growth for all, Sagar, in the region, we are seeing this formulation where security versus growth नहीं है, security and growth है, दोनों एक साथ जा रहे हैं. और अगर हमको blue economy करना है, that old Samudra Manthan where the nectar is going to come from the oceans. It came then from the oceans, and in the future it will come from the oceans.
And could you please tell me these insignia that you're wearing?
Okay, I'll tell you. I'm glad that you asked. This is of course the anchor.
Okay.
Okay, this is to depict my essential tie with the navy in or the maritime world in a broader sense. This is a tri-service pin. This is the National Defense Academy.
Okay, NDA.
So being from the NDA, I thought that I must have this. This is the type pin of INS Vikrant,
Acha ji.
you know,
Wow.
which is the one that we built recently in India. And one of Indian Navy's most spectacular achievements has been that we started building ships in India, making Swavlambhan, 1959 में हमने
विशाखापट्टनम
शुरू
हाँ
किया।
हाँ
हाँ। So now though we build world class ships. We build world class ships, and I'll tell you a couple of instances of that. And leaders in technology, we're doing very well there. And then of course this tie is a Satyapol tie, design tie for the Indian Navy, which has this anchor and cable.
अच्छा जी
So uh, basically
beautiful
I'm wearing my identity on my label and coat. But Sushilti, this thing about Indian Navy building ships, same thing. The lessons of history is that you can't raise a navy, you can't buy a navy, you got to build a navy.
that's true
And the Indian Navy realized it. So even though we had the least amount of budget and uneven state of industry in our country, the Indian Navy actually provided a fillip to shipbuilding. We started building in 59, 60. And now we are building aircraft carriers. So let me tell you again, with no disrespect to the space scientists, I also venerate the achievements of having a rocket on moon, but building an aircraft carrier in India is just as significant and just as huge an achievement. And I'll tell you two offshoots of this. I mean, there's lots. ये film या book की कहानी हो सकती है, but I'll tell you quickly two offshoots of how this ecosystem has led to the two giants and two people. There is a gentleman called Commodore Srikant Paul Raj. You Google him. He's a world famous scientist. He is Professor Emeritus at Stanford, one of the leading scientists in the world. He is responsible for having engineered, invented a technology called MIMO, multiple input, multiple output, which is the heart of 4G and 5G or smartphone.
अच्छा जी
In other words, अगर आज के तारीख में पूरी दुनिया स्मार्टफोन, हम और आप स्मार्टफोन यूज कर रहे हैं, तो इसके एप्स और बहुत सारे जो एडवांटेजेस हैं वो एक इंडियन नेवी ऑफिसर रिटायर्ड कोमोडोर के वजह से है.
क्या बात
ओके, और हम जानते नहीं
नहीं नहीं
हैं,
मुझे नहीं पता था
nobody knows. We know of
हम्म,
world famous scientist, ये वो. He is a leading tech giant now in the US. Now, Paul Raj's journey starts with this sonar that I told you, the quest for an indigenous sonar.
अच्छा
And he is also the designer of our indigenous sonar. He starts, he's an ex-NDA guy, but starts with IIT studies.
so the quest on sonar from INS Khukri वाला जो scene
INS
था
Khukri के
हाँ
बाद,
हाँ
indigenous sonar.
हम्म
So Paul Raj heads that, and over a period of time, he becomes so good in electronics, in all those engineering processes, and he continues with the Naval Physical and Oceanographic Laboratory as a scientist, and then goes abroad, and when he is in the US, then he engineers these other things. दूसरी बात यह है कि एक हमारे जैसे कॉमोडोर पॉलराज है, एक और कैप्टन मोहन राम करके, उनके बारे में भी आप गूगल कर सकते हो. ही इज द डिजाइनर ऑफ आवर इंडिजिनस शिप्स, गोदावरी क्लास वगैरह. और कैप्टन मोहन राम is also famous as the designer of the TVS Scooty.
अच्छा जी
Many people will know him as the designer of TVS Scooty because after retirement he went to Mukund, then joined TVS, became big there. And what the Maruti car did for the woman in big metros, the TVS Scooty did for
that's true
women, ladies,
Yes,
and other people in
yes.
smaller places. Liberated, gave them agency. So Captain Mohan Ram was the designer of TVS Scooty. So इस तरह जो direct give back to the society because of what has happened by these. And there are many such remarkable people, many sportsmen, for example, sailors, many people who contributed to nation building as a whole, whom the
सर
Navy
ये जो
is.
करंट गवर्नमेंट है इनका फोकस तो है फॉर एग्जांपल सिटी बेस्ड नेशनल इंस्टीट्यूट ऑफ ओशन टेक्नोलॉजी दे आर आल्सो बिल्डिंग दिस मैन सबमर्सिबल फॉर डीप सी एक्सप्लोरेशन और ये अभी 2022 में शायद इन्होंने इस पर एक्सपेरिमेंट करना शुरू करा है. सो द करंट गवर्नमेंट इज नॉट ओनली पुशिंग फॉर द स्पेस दे आर आल्सो पुशिंग कि जमीन समुद्र के नीचे भी जाके देखते हैं डीपेस्ट में क्या हो रहा है वो भी करके देखते हैं व्हिच इज अ ग्रेट थिंग टू सी.
It is. See, you have to be in the van of exploration. क्योंकि हमेशा जैसे हम बोलते हैं ना कि if you are ahead, any future negotiations that come around, चाहे वो अंटार्कटिका हो या मून हो या
वो होने वाला है जल्दी.
you will be a part of it. For you to be sitting on the main table, you should have been the early movers.
That's true.
So I think that has been reflected in what you said.
Mhm.
We got to move along several areas: military, non-military, technology, exploring oceans, seabed mining, hazard things.
Mhm.
And yes,
So India is a neighbor of Yemen as well
yes,
with sea.
yes,
India is a neighbor of Oman as well. India is a neighbor of Sudan as well with the sea.
yes.
So हम बोलते हैं neighbor land से नहीं होता, sea से भी तो neighbors है वो.
बिल्कुल, बिल्कुल.
तो what is the role of Navy to develop that kind of diplomacy with these countries?
हाँ, हम यही मानते हैं. You put it very well.
Mhm.
See, एक तो navies are natural fit for diplomacy because, as I said, sea is multilateral medium. There are several actors. So when you do anything at sea, you have to be conscious of, आप किसी को just you can't fire at anyone. You have to make sure that he or she is your antagonist, or your adversary, and there is a situation of war, some various things. So the sea is a natural medium because it's a global common for multilateralism, and navies are very good fit for it. And however, it's not enough to have a theoretical formulation. You need to have capacities to do that. And that's where Indian Navy has been good in building capacities and capabilities, both the hardware and software. We can say today that Yemen is our neighbor. But if you don't have ships that can go up to Yemen, okay, then there is no point
That's
of
true.
it. So you need to have ships with big legs, sea legs, which can go all across the world, flying your flag, showing your flag and saying, okay, from India we come as ambassadors. Similarly, you need to have the software, you need to have people skills, you need to train your naval people in diplomacy. Apart from diplomats, Navy is the only one that is trained formally in terms of how you interact, multilateral, certain language felicity, certain soft skills. All this is needed when you go abroad and talk to people. Certain understanding of international law, So there are various subtleties when you deal. So where Indian Navy is playing it big in recent years is, we just finished an event, Sushil Saab, in Visakhapatnam called Milan 24. More than 50 nations were there. More than 50 nations represented. It's a gathering, a congregation of the navies. So now when they come to Visakhapatnam, apart from local, city, economy, everyone has a buy-in. They get to see your industry.
True.
They get to see what you've done. You have Indian-built ships there. You have the Vikrant. You have other Indian-built ships. You have Vikramaditya. They see how you're operating aircraft carriers. तो एक deterrence भी होता है, friendship भी होता है, diplomacy भी होता है, So this sort of engaging multilaterally with several countries in the region. As we say, we like to position the Indian Navy, like to position itself as a preferred security partner and first responder. So when there's a crisis, we'd like to be the first responder. When there's a security issue, we'd like to, and it is a unique Indian model of collaboration, of cooperation, not of contestation or conflict. तो जब हम येमेन से निकालते हैं, we evacuated people in Op Rahat in 2015. It was not only Indians. We brought in so many other countrymen.
Recently also we saved like 15, 16 Pakistanis.
Yes, that is just, so they were hijacked. Their ship was hijacked. We saved them.
सबसे फनी तो वो था जो एक कोई शिप जिसमें इंडियंस भी थे, आई गेस ब्रिटिश और सूडान का शिप था, मुझे याद नहीं कहाँ का था. तो उसमें क्या हुआ कि these pirates, Somalian pirates got into it and the Indian Navy didn't even fight with them. They just threatened them from outside कि हम बाहर ही खड़े हैं, हम तुम लोग चले जाओ, हमें तुमसे मतलब नहीं है. And they just got down on the ship and ran away.
Deterrence. मतलब वो बोलते हैं, see, often when they see.
तो पता है, just to let you know because you don't understand, उसमें क्या हुआ कि बाद में पूछता है मुझसे कि क्या हुआ था. तो these people they just threaten them कि छोड़ दो शिप, और तो वो भाग गए सोमालियन वाले, छोड़ के चले गए कि हमें मरना थोड़े है लड़के इनसे.
So ये action replay in many ways this is because 2008 to 12 में जब I was our defense attaché in Kenya when piracy was at its peak, उस वक्त भी I can tell you from personal knowledge and authority because Kenya was like the political capital of Somalia in some ways of many exiles. They used to say कि हम लोग Indian ships से डरते हैं. And at one point of time the largest counter piracy attempts, thwarting, largest number of pirates as prisoners were in India was in India. So we were the lead player then. So what are we now? We are telling the world that when it comes to security issues, we'll take this one. We'll take the lead. अभी Houthis के साथ चाहे हो या piracy जो हो रहा है Red Sea में चाहे हो, we are again in the forefront. So with that you show your resolve, your ability to fight, your commandos, firefighting, explosive ordnance disposal, a whole range of operational things you have in the bouquet, and yet you are also able to showcase friendship, you are able to showcase humanitarian assistance, disaster relief, you give hydrography assistance, medical assistance. So the canvas is wide, and what the Indian Navy is doing is another huge contribution to our diplomacy, which has not been registered enough.
Okay. नेवी के साथ ये हो रहा है बार-बार.
मैं नहीं बोल रहा हूँ. I'm saying public awareness. The government is aware, of course. The government is surely aware, and they appreciate it. Large public national discourse.
Or I don't know if you want to answer this. Or is India the net security provider in the Indian Ocean?
देखिए, when you say net security provider,
Preferred तो आपने बोला कि it's a preferred security.
phraseology में क्या होता है? नेट में एक मैथमेटिकल इक्वेशन आता है कि मेरे पास सिक्योरिटी ज्यादा है, तुम्हारे पास कम है, मेरे पास सरप्लस है, आपके पास डेफिसिट है, इसलिए हम दे रहे हैं. ऐसी बात नहीं है, हम पार्टनरशिप बोल रहे हैं. So the net security provider was, I agree with you, it was a phrase in use for a long time as a formulation, but I think people realized that it had these little edges in the way it
मतलब it's like we're not calling कि हम king हैं.
हाँ, हाँ. So
We're saying we're partners.
yeah, so it seemed to be a phrase that probably brought in aspects that is certainly not India. India is about benign friendship, you know, and extending a hand of friendship and saying we'll partner. चाहे आप 10% 20% ले आओ, हम 80% ले आएंगे, पर हम उसको partnership ही बोलते हैं. So because of that model, I think we have changed over to this. However, the principles remain the same. For India to become a big power, an Indian Ocean power, an Indo-Pacific power, we should continuously grow. We should have a wide bouquet in the way we have our capabilities spread. We should be able to do military role, constabulary role, diplomatic role, humanitarian role all together. And your hardware and your software and your people should be capable of doing that. So as long as you're doing that, I'm sure countries in the region will realize that in India they have a good friend.
तो हमने बातचीत करी आज की हमारे मतलब इस इंटरव्यू के बाद आई कैन से दैट हमारे प्रिय कॉमोडोर केसनूर जी से एक बहुत ही ब्यूटीफुल कॉन्वर्सेशन हुई है, एक बहुत ही शानदार बातचीत हुई है जिसमें बहुत सारी डिटेल्स उभर के सामने आई हैं अलग अलग विभागों की जो जिस तरह से नेवी ऑपरेट करती है. मुझे उम्मीद है आपको पसंद आया होगा, आपको ये समझ में आया होगा कि किस तरह से भारत की नेवी काम करती है. आप लोग इससे सीख लीजिए, समझिए कि आपके यहाँ पे आपके देश में कितने महान लोग आके जा चुके. कान्होजी आंग्रे एक युद्ध नहीं हारे, वो ब्रिटिश और पुर्तगाल को मिलके हराया उन्होंने, दोनों मिलके आए थे. कान्होजी आंग्रे ने अकेले हरा दिया था उनको. हाँ, विश्व का पहला जो वो बना है, क्या कहते हैं उसे, बंदरगाह है, वो भारत में है. आज से लगभग 4300 साल पहले लोथल में भारत सरकार उसको म्यूजियम बना रही, सर बता रहे थे. तो मेरा ये कहना है कि आपको भारत पे पता करिए क्या क्या ऐसा जिस पे आपको गर्व होना चाहिए, और इन लेफ्ट लीनिंग इतिहासकारों के चक्कर मत पड़िए, अपना इतिहास खुद पढ़िए. इतना ही आज तक के लिए बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद कि आप हमारे साथ जुड़े रहे. हमारे चैनल को सब्सक्राइब करिए, वीडियोस को लाइक करिए और बेल आइकन टू ऑल द आइटम्स जरूर दबाइए. बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद.